Welcome to After Contact, a show that explores the potential implications and possibilities that might arise for humanity after we have open contact with an alien intelligence. And in today's episode, we'll explore what legal issues might arise post-contact and look at how the legal system may have to adapt in the light of our interactions with extraterrestrials. Today's guest is Danny Sheehan, a renowned constitutional and public interest lawyer with extensive experience in public policy and UFO disclosure. Danny, welcome to the show. It's a privilege to be here with you and hear your insights.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Nick.
So how did a lawyer first get interested in aliens? And related to that, can you tell me about your work now with the former Pentagon ATIP director, Luis Elizondo?
Sure. No, I got involved in this officially, actually, back in 1977 when President Carter was elected. And President Carter had demanded information from the Central Intelligence Agency about the UFO phenomenon because President Carter, when he'd been governor of Georgia, had seen a UFO. Not like a light in the sky or something, but a UFO. And so he asked them to give him the information about it, and the head of the CIA at that time, George H.W. Bush, refused to give it to him, saying he didn't have a need to know. And so President Carter went to the House Science and Technology Committee and had them contact the Library of Congress, Congressional Research Service, to do a secret investigation of all the information and seek to get it declassified so he could see it.
And I understand that you've recently attended a fairly high-level meeting in Washington, D.C. that might throw some light on these fundamental questions of whether or not we're alone. What can you tell us?
Well, it's interesting that when Lou was running the ATIP program, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Project, he got totally frustrated with the fact that he was being lied to. He was being blocked from getting at information, even though he had all the adequate security clearances. And so he ended up writing a letter to the Secretary of Defense, resigning in protest over this. And then he was contacted by Leslie Kean, a friend of both of us, and asked to explain why he resigned. What was he doing there? And so he, along with another person who shall remain unnamed, went to the interview with Leslie Kean and gave over the information. And Lou had gotten declassified these 3 videos that were taken from the F-18 Hornet gun cameras of real UFOs. Functioning and doing surveillance on aircraft carriers that we had, et cetera. And he released it to the New York Times. And that's what triggered this whole new phase of this, that when the New York Times put on the front page of the New York Times that UFOs were real. And when interviewing Lou and Chris Mellon from the Secretary of Defense office, and they said that these are absolutely not some secret high-tech technology of our government, and they're not Russian, and they're not Chinese, period. We're telling you they're not. And so the question arose is, well, what are they? And they said, well, all we know is that they're unidentified. And then further inquiries got put to them when it went ballistic. Actually, all the other news media people started coming and asking Lou for interviews, and the AP pressed him on this. The Associated Press said, well, if they're not Russian, and they're definitely not Russian, and they're not Chinese, then and they're not ours, what are they? And so Lou told them. They said, well, the consensus is of the people that are professionals that have been doing this in a top secret way is that they're very likely extraterrestrial.
Wait, so you're saying that Luis Elizondo, the guy on the inside charged with investigating UFOs, said that the consensus was that this was probably aliens.
That's right, extraterrestrial, specifically, because aliens covers a lot of territory.
Okay, and we can get to that for sure.
Yes.
But now Lou, I know, got some pushback.
Yes,
and this is presumably why you are now representing him legally. Where do things stand?
Well, where things stand now is that Lou has filed a complaint both with the Defense Department and also with the Director of National Intelligence, because the people inside the bureaucracy who are lying and deceiving the American public and still dissembling about this issue, despite the fact that the Pentagon has actually officially acknowledged that they are not ours and not Russian or Chinese, and that there's still some elements that are pushing back against him in lying, in saying that it isn't true, there never was any top secret program. They're still saying that. And so Lou filed a complaint with the Defense Department Inspector General and with the Inspector General of the Director of National Intelligence, saying that this is unconstitutional. This is illegal, lying to the American public about this. It's un-American. He's quite put off about that. And that's what he's done.
And what happened at this recent meeting? How did that change things?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that's really quite striking is the fact that the personnel in the Inspector General's offices, all they seem to be interested in is the technology. How fast do they go? How is it possible that they can come from 80,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean in 0.7 seconds? And then go underwater and travel at 100 miles an hour? And how can they do complete right turns, going over like 8,000 miles an hour, and then they do a direct, 180-degree turn? How can they possibly do that? And because the problem is that the original investigations that were top secret were all undertaken to try to discover the weapons technology potential of these. How can we make a weapon out of these? How can we get a jet fighter that can do all this kind of stuff? Which is bizarre, because there was no State Department people involved, no foreign policy people involved, no public policy people, no economics people. What are the implications of who it is that's behind this? And when Lou was challenged on this, he said, look, because even the Inspector Generals were not briefed in on this, right? And so he said, look, we know what the Russians have completely. He said, and the fact is, this is interesting, he said, we've been tracking this technology since 1947.
Right.
That's what he said to him. And it's the same technology, he said. And he said the Russians in 1947, we had just come out of World War II. In Russia, this is what he said to him. The Russians had lost 20 million people. They were tearing up railroad tracks that went into Europe to get metal. He said, in China, that's what he said. He said, in China, in 1947, their major means of transportation were ox carts with stone wheels. That's what he said to him.
So the question then is, let's get beyond talking about the craft.
Yes.
Let's say who's behind the wheel.
That's right.
Who is behind the wheel?
Well, that's every time we raised that with the Inspector Generals, they just kind of recoiled.
So, with the Inspector Generals not briefed on this, then this raises the question, it's secrecy again. So how much of your work is about pushing back against that secrecy?
90% of it. What we're saying is, on the one hand, Lou is upset over the fact that they're lying about him,
right,
and saying that, we don't know who he is. There was never any such top secret program. He's upset about that because it's had repercussions on him professionally. And most recently, it's just caused him to lose his job as the major advisor to the U.S. Space Force on UFOs. And because of all the pressure coming from this element inside the Defense Department and the intelligence communities about whom he's complaining, they've had to have him leave that post. So he's upset about that, but he's primarily upset about the fact that they're all lying to the American public still. And he said, we're past that. We all know that this is not us and not the Chinese. It's something that likely is extraterrestrial. It's irresponsible and unconstitutional not to start preparing our people to address this thing.
Well, on that point then, if we say let's fast forward, and let's just hope the day comes, and it has now come.
Yeah.
We are not alone. We are being visited. If that's the scenario that we're dealing with, but with this backstory of an 80-year cover-up, let me ask you this as a lawyer.
Yeah.
I mean, what are the repercussions going to be legally for the people who were keeping this secret? Are there going to be prosecutions? Is there going to be some sort of inquiry? Is there going to be accountability? What happens?
Well, number one, probably 85% of the people that have been involved in it since 1947 are dead.
Sure,
So
but someone now must be managing
still
this.
active.
What about them?
That's right. And that's a very interesting question, because one of the things that they put in the new bill, there's a new Senate Bill 4503, which is the mandate from Congress now that there be an office set up demanding that all the information that all the Defense Department people have and all the intelligence communities have be given over to the Congress, to this committee. And it said in there, if anybody retaliates in any way against a person coming forward with this information, then there can be an action in federal court on the part of the person who is being lied about to undertake an action against them and the government, both in their personal capacity and the government itself.
Right.
So there's a new legal cause of action.
And I want to come on to that,
Yes.
but I want to press you on the separate point.
Yes.
That's retaliatory action.
Yes,
but
yes.
what about the people who are currently keeping this great secret from the American people and from the world? Will they face any legal repercussions?
Well, they haven't. One of the things to keep in mind clearly from a legal point of view is that in order for a federal court or any state court, if there's not a common law, long time, hundreds of years old kind of theory of a cause of action for some particular wrongdoing, then there has to be a statute passed to give authority to the judicial branch. At the beginning of every complaint, you have to set forth what the statutory authority is for the court to actually rule on this. And at the present time, there is no legal cause of action against someone who has just concealed the information. And they do have a legal cause of action now as soon as they pass the bill for any retribution against anybody.
Right.
But there's no cause of action for simply concealing about it or even lying about it. And so that's a bridge that they've not crossed yet.
Well, there's a related question, and it may be that the answer's the same, but I want to ask it because I think it's very important.
Sure.
It goes back to the point you said about it's not just the craft. It's maybe who's behind the wheel, but the point is there are lots of people all around the world who say not only have they seen UFOs, but they have interacted, and some people claim to have been abducted, to have had medical procedures carried out.
That's right.
And further than that, some of those people claim that there is active involvement and at the very least complicity from elements within the US government. What if these people, we are, for the purposes of this discussion, it's happened, it's confirmed, it's
Yes.
real.
Yeah, that's right.
What happens if those people say, wait, they lied about us, we suffered actual physical and mental harm, I want a class action against the US government for this? How does that go?
At the present time, there is no specific statutory authority that's been granted to the judicial branch to grant that type of relief. There's two categories. One is if they've been lied about, their careers have been destroyed, there's a covert operation. Now, it's been established that Richard Dolan, in his 2-volume work on the UFOs in the national security state, has uncovered the internal documents that show this was a conscious, covert operation that was undertaken by the Defense Department and the Central Intelligence Agency to discredit and to destroy the reputations of average citizens who have attempted to simply come forward.
Now, I'm not saying that
yes.
reputational damage isn't important. Clearly it is. But,
Yes.
but if we're talking actual physical harm, isn't that a whole new ballgame?
Yes, but there's a concept of proximate causation here. I don't want to get too technical, but the fact of the matter is, in order to recover under a common law theory without a statutory source of authority for the judicial branch, to undertake an action in tort, saying that, look, I was injured by this vehicle, you have to be able to show proximate causation, that the United States government somehow caused that injury. And if this is in fact an extraterrestrial civilization and one of their craft has landed and a person came up near it or got near it and got radiation poisoning or something like that, there's no nexus necessarily between that and the United States government.
What about a sort of situation where, and again, some people have claimed this is exactly the position we're in, a deal has been done historically between the US government and the extraterrestrials, giving them permission to mutilate cows and horses and other animals, and to take people, American citizens, against their will, subject them to, what about that?
Well, that's a particular factual thesis. And if, in fact, an attorney were willing to file a complaint making that set of factual allegations, then they're going to have to deal with what they call Rule 11. Rule 11 is a rule under the federal judicial system, and it's derivatively also applicable in most of the states, that unless you have adequate evidence on the basis of which a reasonable person would conclude that not only that your accusation is true, but that there's a probability that given access to the civil discovery process, you would be able to produce court-admissible evidence to establish, by a preponderance of the evidence at least, that what your accusation is true. Now, this set of accusations largely depend upon a 1964 incident that allegedly happened at Hollowman Air Force Base in New Mexico. There's witnesses there, and Edgar Mitchell told me directly about this in a discussion I had with him, that one of his very best friends was there at Hollowman and saw this thing happen, that three UFOs approached, jet fighters were sent out to accompany them to land at Hollowman. One of them came and landed. The other two hovered and waited, and a being got out of the vehicle. And United States Air Force officers went and had a face-to-face discussion with them. Okay, now that evidence, and they say that there's like I think 60 minutes or something of film footage, 16 millimeter film footage of this event. Now, the thing is, if you go in and you make your claim about that and you demand discovery to be given that, what you're going to run to is assertions of national security.
Right.
This is a national security issue. We're not going to respond to the discovery. And you'd have to have not only a federal judge, but you're going to have at least a 3-judge panel of the Court of Appeals, and probably the en-banc review of like all 13 of the judges on the Federal Court of Appeals, plus a majority of the United States Supreme Court has made a decision. We're going to make them cough up that information.
Right. But it may be that further events push that to the fore.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to say, let's just assume that happens.
Yep.
Let's assume we get that. Let's assume, and you mentioned a couple of times the need for legislation.
Yes.
Let's suppose that Congress finds out things over the next few months that makes them think, yes, we need that legislation. Yes. So let's then get it. Do you think if we found ourselves in that position, and I'm thinking, my question is about amnesty. My question is whether you might offer an amnesty to people. And I'm wondering how that plays into the sort of Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that we had in Northern Ireland and South Africa.
Absolutely insightful, because that is the consensus that's going on right now, is let's figure out how to do an amnesty program. But the problem, or I guess the challenge is, all of that discussion is going on the part of the people inside the military and inside the intelligence department, saying, here, let's give all of us amnesty before we're going to really get our shoulder to the wheel to get this information out. So that it's coming from them. Now, so the question is, where's the pushback going to come from? Are members of Congress going to want to punish them? Do people in the UFO community insist upon punishing them? My sense is that that's very likely not to happen.
Right.
So that I think there's going to be an amnesty granted, a specific amnesty granted as a means of getting. But the key is there going to be any kind of a punishment if they don't come forward? If the amnesty is offered to them and they still refuse and they still lie about it and stuff like that, the key is to put teeth into this, to kind of punish them for doing that. And that's going to be a political reality. We have to generate enough citizen support and kind of upset about that to demand that, okay, we'll give them amnesty, but if they lie still and they hold back the information, there has to be some kind of repercussions. And that's going to be a complete political question as to whether we can generate the kind of citizen support for such punishment.
Well, it depends, doesn't it? We need this balance of carrot and stick, maybe, to encourage these people. But I can totally understand, being ex-government myself, that people want their kind of get-out-of-jail-free card first. Yeah. Now, how does this tie in with something you mentioned a little bit earlier, the related issue of what's now in the new Defense bill,
yes.
the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2023,
That's right.
where there are multiple provisions on all this. Where do we stand with that?
Well, it's on the brink of getting passed now. It's been passed now in the House just last Friday. It actually got passed. And so there's the provisions now, it's coming before the Senate, that there are provisions in it setting up this office. They call it the JPO. It's the Joint Project, the Joint Program Office, because it's a joint program between the Defense Department and the Director of National Intelligence. That's a joint program to set this thing up, and that's progressing now. And so a lot of it has to do with the seriousness of the staff that are appointed to this. The head of the Secretary of Defense appoints the director. The new Director of National Intelligence appoints the deputy, and then they staff it up. But on the face of the statute, it demands that full funding be given to this, full resources, complete access to all the internal information. And it's really interesting, they've demanded, it's very telling, demanded all the information that's ever been gathered in any sense from the Defense Department or intelligence community at all since January 1st of 1947. It always goes back to that 1947.
Kenneth Arnold and Roswell.
That's right.
Now, I want to take almost like a wider perspective on this, because we talked a lot about the United States, but this is a global issue, right?
That's
so
right.
what, international law, I know it raises a whole new set of questions,
Yes.
but what changes do you think might be necessary? What bodies, and I'm thinking of maybe the United Nations,
Sure.
do we need to deal with something that's not just United States, but it's global?
Well, one of the challenges, and you know this, of course, is the fact that the United States is the big elephant in the room. The United States still dominates NATO in all of the, a little less so than it used to, but dominates all the alliances of the Western powers, the Western allied powers. And virtually none of the other countries are going to take a lead on this. They'll start developing and giving out some of their information, et cetera. But when it comes to setting up an international regime of some sort, that is going to push for the revelation of all of this stuff, it's all going to be controlled by the United States national security state. The United States national security state is the issue that rests at the base of all this. The national security state that has existed since at least the National Security Act of 1947, again, that was passed by the Congress in 1947.
Right.
They have controlled all of the information about the UFO phenomenon. And until the national security state bureaucracy makes a decision that they're going to release this information, it ain't going to happen. No matter what the rest of the countries in the world want to do, it's not going to happen. And this is a major fundamental constitutional problem, because this national security state that's arisen since the end of the Second World War has completely skewered the entire constitutional fabric of our government. And that there's this authoritarian dimension to the national security state, where they don't feel they're bound by any laws. They destroy people, they assassinate people. They wage covert wars against governments that we have diplomatic relations with. And so until we deal fundamentally with that problem,
Right.
We're not going to get full disclosure from those people, because they're going to sit on it and hold it.
Right. Now, earlier you mentioned the work that you've done as a theologian, really. And I'd like to, you mentioned how you got into it and your involvement with the Jesuits and
That's
things.
right.
But I've followed developments on this with interest. And I know that, the church has made some statements on this.
Very important.
So my question to you, you've been on the inside of some of those discussions.
Yes,
You've been sitting in the room.
Yes, I have.
Does the church know something, or does it just suspect something? And how might there be the same sort of issues that arise with church secrecy, if that's what we're dealing with, that arise with government secrecy?
That's interesting. Let me tell you that on November 10th of 2009, there was the end of a major set of conferences they had at Castel Gandolfo over in Rome, where the Pontifical Observatory is located. And this was under Benedict, not under Francis, but it was under Benedict, the previous pope. They had a major set of conferences with major scientists, and they came forward and issued an official statement from the press office of the Vatican. It was issued by Father Jose Gabriel Funes, who was at the time the director of the Pontifical Observatory, and he said the following, and it's very important to track exactly what he said. He said, in light of the discovery of more and more of these new exoplanets, because of the airborne observatories that we now have that are in outer space, he said, it has now become clear to us that much sooner than had been previously anticipated, our human family is going to discover that there exists intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. Therefore, the time has now arrived for the commencement of an extremely important conversation among the laity about what the philosophical and theological questions are that are posed to our human family by the discovery of life elsewhere in the universe. Now, I immediately, as the former chief counsel for the Jesuit National Headquarters in the United States in their social ministry office, I reached out to Father Jose Gabriel Funes and flew to see him within 2 days. And within 2 minutes of our conversation, he said, look, let's be clear about what we're talking about here. We're not talking about the discovery through the space telescopes of some single cell life form beneath the frozen ocean in some distant moon. We're talking about another highly intelligent, highly technologically developed, but categorically non-human species right here in our galaxy. That's what he said.
And as some people believe, visiting us,
oh, yes,
and even among us, which raises the question, if that's the scenario, how do we redefine, legally, but wider than that, the concept of what it means to be human? And do we even, for example, have to look at the Constitution to dovetail this new reality?
Oh yeah, there's any doubt in my mind that this is going to call for huge responses on the part of our juridical structures, our legislative structures, our executive branch structures, our international relationships, the international juridical bodies, including the United Nations and other major things like the World Trade Organization, the International Bank. All of these things need to be reevaluated so that in addition to the call from the Catholic Church, the official call for a discussion of the fundamental philosophical and theological questions that are posed, there are fundamental public policy questions that are at issue here. Now, this is all within the realm of law, and that's why I've been involved in this. And I've been trying to get people to come to grips with this. I asked the Washington Interreligious Staff Council, the head of all 54 of the major religious denominations in the United States back in 1977, after I had been given access to the classified portions of Project Blue Book. I approached the Washington Interreligious Staff Council and asked them to set up a task force to actually start to address these public policy questions so that at least the 54 major religious denominations in the United States could take a position on this. And they basically just looked at me like, I was from another planet, as it were. and so they wouldn't do it. So that everybody's dragging their feet. They're waiting to be told by people that they view to be the authority that it's okay to think about this. The church has now come forward. Now the United States Pentagon has come forward, at least the Defense Department. And what we need to do is get more of the institutions to come forward to authorize the people to have this discussion. Now, my argument as always is we don't have to wait for people in positions of authority to authorize us to have this conversation. We need to generate this conversation ourselves. And that's why I'm talking about setting up a new 501c3 public interest office, like a UFO 501c3, to bring together all of the people that are involved in this, all the 501c3 communities, all the civil rights communities, the public justice communities, all of us to come together and track the activities of this new office that's being set up by the Congress to see that they do their job, to be a watchdog over them, and the things that they don't do, that they're required by the statute to do, that we undertake the process of doing that if we can.
Well, on the theme of bringing in other people, I know, and this is slightly different, but I know that you've worked with indigenous populations
and
things. What does the indigenous experience maybe teach us or bring to the table here? And I mean, I'm thinking specifically, for example, the fact that some indigenous people believe that they came from the stars, or that they have interaction with the star people.
That's right. The Lakota people who, the Lakota People's Law Office, we have an office in our Romero Institute. The Romero Institute that we have in California has offices up in South Dakota in Rapid City. And we've been up there for 20 years dealing with the pipelines and all the other things that have been going on. And the Lakota people believe that they actually have contact with beings from the Pleiades. There's the Lakota speakers, the Na-Cha, who are the actual traditional spiritual leaders, believe that the Lakota people came from the Pleiades and came up into Earth through the wind caves in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Now that's pretty Lakota-centric, you know. But it's analogous to the Adam, creation story in the Garden of Eden kind of thing. But the bottom line is that there have been huge numbers of reports in indigenous communities around the world of actual contact with extraterrestrial beings. You know, now we in the Anglo community, the Anglo-European community, have now had lots of reports about direct contact with extraterrestrial beings. There's these so-called abduction experiences and encounters with these people. But this has been going on for 1,000 years in the indigenous community. And they've been very specific about the star people coming and meeting with them and talking with them. There's a major consensus. I was sitting in a meeting, for example, up on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, and one of the people that was opposing something that I was proposing that we do said, "Don't listen to Mr. Sheehan. He believes in UFOs." And everybody else on the tribal council looked at each other and said, "Well, don't you? You know, I mean, you're a Lakota person," and everybody in the whole room all agreed with me. You know, so it's very different in the indigenous cultures. They accept this as a reality.
Well, this brings to mind, of course, the famous quote from the late Professor Stephen Hawking, who said that when we encounter, we being humanity, extraterrestrials, this may be analogous to when the Western explorers encountered the Native Americans. Only, as you know, he went on to say, this time we're the Native Americans.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Well, he actually went so far as to say that we ought to not try to contact them, that we ought to not let them know we're here. Like, that's what he actually said. You know, we ought to be careful not to, send out the communication to them, et cetera, which is totally silly, because he's completely ignoring all the data about the hundreds and thousands of contacts with direct ETs that have gone on our planet. So that cat's already out of the bag, so he's way behind the power curve on this thing. The question of how we have diplomatic relations with them is an extraordinarily important, one of the sub-questions that I was talking about needs to get addressed. That's why I keep trying to, in the meetings that I have with the Inspector Generals, et cetera, with Lou and others, they're saying, look, we have to do a lot more than just try to figure out the technology of these vehicles. There's this extraordinarily important thing about what's our relationship going to be with this civilization for the next 100,000 years. This is that moment in human history where we have to really resolve these fundamental questions. And so that I believe that this conversation has to take place, and the only way to get it to take place is for we individual citizens to begin the conversation ourselves, to get past this thing about, is it really true? Are there really ETs? Do they really have contact with? That's all clearly so. It's just as clear that the ETs are actually having direct contact and communications with our people as it is that the UFOs are real. Okay, but the institutions have only gotten to step one, acknowledging that the UFO vehicles are actually probably extraterrestrial, but they've not acknowledged that we're having contact with them.
Well, it sounds as if there are an awful lot of work to do here, that obviously, firstly, we may need new legislation.
Yes.
Tied with that, we may need to redefine the question of what is humanity, and that ties in with another interesting question, which is, I guess, personhood rights, which I think some of the great apes have, but yes, we may be having that discussion in relation to various AI programs that we're developing. But it leads to a very, I guess, again, I want to play what if with this, because, for the purposes of this conversation, this has already happened. It's a done deal. And so one can envisage various scenarios unfolding. Let's say, for example, there is open contact between humans and extraterrestrials, and an extraterrestrial kills a human being, or a human being kills an extraterrestrial. How on earth, if you'll excuse the pun, do we deal with that?
Well, this is going to be the issue of diplomatic immunity. Just like the Biden administration just acknowledged that the head of the Arab Republic, the United Arab Emirate or United Arab Saudi Arabian government, killed the journalist and dismembered him in the embassy. And the Biden administration, Justice Department said, we have to acknowledge that they have diplomatic immunity, no matter how bad it was that they did this thing. So that it's quite clear that what we're going to be trying to do is apply the historical principles and criteria that have been developed by our planetary intergovernmental relations are going to have to be applied to the issues of our relationship with the extraterrestrial civilization. Now, it's not going to be a one-to-one match. There's probably going to have to be some very unique things that have to be determined. But for the most part, the transfer of all of our principles that have to do with international law are going to have to govern our relationship with the extraterrestrial beings. This raises one fundamental question, and that is whether or not it's true that there have been direct communications on the part of our institution of the United States government with representatives that are clear, legitimate representatives of an extraterrestrial civilization. Just because they happen to be piloting a particular craft doesn't necessarily mean that they're vested with the authority to make decisions on behalf of an extraterrestrial civilization. And it's also a particular officer from the Air Force or something that has a direct face-to-face contact with them. For example, at Hollowman, it's not clear that he was vested with the authority to make any kind of decisions. These all have to be visited now, but we have to start doing it now. And the citizens cannot wait for the governmental institutions to make these decisions. But we do have to find out whether they've got some kind of relationship already going that's official so we can find out what it is. That is completely unconstitutional for our government structures in the executive branch to be concealing this information from the American public under some guise of it's a national security question that that they exist, like as if Russia doesn't know they exist and the Chinese don't know they exist. I mean, this is silly, and it's a malfunction of the national security state apparatus, and we've got to at least amend the national security state rules and regulations to open up a discourse about this issue.
Well, now you have, I want to draw these threads together now because I think you've been in an extraordinary position, that you've been on the inside in a lot of different but interrelated areas of this, whether it's indigenous communities, whether it's government, whether it's religion.
Yes.
And I want to ask you, drawing that all together, what do you think is the big picture here? And are you optimistic for the future? How do you think things will play out?
Well, I'm extremely optimistic because the reality is that until such time as our human family collectively raise our levels of consciousness about our place in the galaxy and what our place is in the chain of evolution of consciousness, in the material realm, into kind of a numinous experience of the unitive nature of reality. Until we reach that point, we're going to continue to function in a very primitive way, warlike way. And so that I think that this opportunity to realize that we are in a much different place in the spectrum of sentient consciousness than we thought we were. We are not at the pinnacle of the pyramid of all conscious life in the universe. And does that mean that we're going to collapse, fall into our footprint and think that, we don't mean anything? We're just like ants on our planet? No, we've got to evolve a sense of our own consciousness and where we fit into the scheme of things and be realistic about it, and then figure out how we can, from a diplomatic point of view, negotiate our relationship with the extraterrestrial civilization. We don't know exactly what it's made up of. We don't know how many planets or star systems there are involved in it. We have to find this out. And the fact of the matter is, as far as I can tell, our official government institutions are not doing their job in that regard. Somebody is. there's somebody that knows. There's some element, whether it's like the progeny of MJ-12, but it's some combination of the major defense contractors in national security state bureaucracies and others. There's some group of people that know what the answers to these fundamental questions are. And my job is to try to leverage the relationship that we have, that Lou has and that others have, with our congressional representatives to demand that they be told about this.
So we might be facing a situation where not just confirmation of an extraterrestrial presence, but extraterrestrials living among us, sharing technology. I don't know, some people say there's a hybridization program, so you get into questions about, marriage and breeding, incorporating artificial intelligence, maybe alien AI into our bodies, which maybe changes who we are as a species. And all that plays again to that fundamental question of what does it mean to be a human? Do we have to rethink all that?
Well, there's several sub-questions there, each of which is interesting. I think that there's ample evidence that the extraterrestrial, some of at least the extraterrestrial species that are coming here, and there are a handful of them apparently. That you have the grays and you have the what they call the praying mantis people. There are the humanoids that look like human beings. There's a handful of them apparently, and we haven't the 501c3 that we're talking about, the UFO C3 that we're talking about trying to establish so that we can get some definitive working hypotheses about these things is important. But it's quite clear at this stage that in the foreseeable future, for the next 100 years, perhaps, that the interbreeding specifically with the more distinctly different races, like the reptilians that may be from Beta Reticuli, one of the planets, that it's less likely that there will be conscious, voluntary interbreeding with those beings than those that may be arguably from the Pleiades that look much more human, which has to do with all kinds of questions about the origins of our human species on our planet, which is another extraordinarily important question. But what we have to do is start thinking about these questions. The mere fact that you would ask those questions means some intelligent people have to be directing our attention to these things to get out ahead of this thing, because you don't want to be faced with a fait accompli and you haven't been prepared for it. And that's what causes people more anxiety than anything else. That's why I think it's important to get started now that we've had confirmation that the UFOs are real, and implicitly, at least, that they're being piloted by an extraterrestrial civilization that's just non-human, that raises that second question of how we're going to relate to them. And there's all these sub-questions that you've raised about how we're going to interact and relate with them. One of the important things that people keep thinking about is our culture going to be completely subsumed? In the same way that when the outside world discovers a primitive island in the Pacific that has a tribe on it that has never had any contact with the outside world, within a matter of months, that more primitive culture is completely dissipated and absorbed into the larger culture. And so that's one of the concerns that we have. If there's a galactic civilization that is literally billions of years more advanced than we are, what happens to our human culture? And so we have to start having these discussions way over and above how fast do these things go, how do they make U-turns at 20,000 miles an hour. We're going to have to make some important decisions about this. And that's why the human family has to be engaged in this. It can't be left to some group of bureaucrats inside the Defense Department, who perceive, the old saying is, it's an old Sufi saying, when a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets. And the Defense Department, whose job it is to protect the kind of sovereignty of our airspace, when they perceive these vehicles coming and going in their protected airspace, as they refer to them, they just start viewing them as a military adversary. That's an extraordinarily dangerous and narrow perspective on this issue. We have to open this up to discussions of theologians and philosophers and public policy people, economists, all psychiatrists, social psychiatrists. We have to engage everything that we've got as a human family. This is the 2-minute drill. This is the 2-minute drill. You got to go to your 2-minute drill here. Everything you've got, you got to put on the line. It's not 1 foot in a pile of dust. That how we're going to get to the end zone on this in time. So we've got to do this now, and that's why I'm talking about trying to work with people such as yourself, who's been in this field for ages. All the people that we've known that are still alive, and a lot of them are gone now. But everybody who's still alive and operational in this area. We've got to come together and work together in this new 501c3 kind of coalition so that we can start to identify these questions and put them to this committee in Congress, because they're going to have this joint project office. And so we know where to go. We know where to put the questions to and say, if you're not asking these questions, we're going to start asking them for you, and you need to cooperate with us. That's what we need to do as a citizen action.
Well, I think what you've said, and particularly the example you gave about the subsuming of cultures where there's a technology gap, shows why this is not just interesting, but it's darned important. And as you say, people need to get ahead of this, and people need to start working on it now, because as we've discovered in the course of this conversation, there are a whole range of questions that arise: diplomatic, theological, and legal. So Danny, Thank you so much for sharing your insights on this. It has been absolutely fascinating.
Far out.
It's exciting to consider the legalities and the implications of open contact, both from a current state of affairs as well as the other potential scenarios we might encounter. Another fascinating topic to consider is the religious implications of extraterrestrial contact and the changes it will bring to humanity. Remember, you are the future of humanity after contact. Thanks for joining me, and until next time, I'm your host, Nick Pope.